Okay, here we are.
All right.
Today is what, February 10th,
Right.
1990, so we're logging this in now. And
Right. A new
this
decade.
is one of the rare occasions where we're all three together and talking about family. And what I thought, in terms of organizing this, is if we could trace the history back, first of your grandfather, and talk about his background, and then your father, and then if we could do the same thing with Mama and her parents. Okay, so
Well, I don't know too much about Dad's folks.
so maybe Uncle
Well,
Elmer, if you want to start on that.
I know only from what I was told
It was
about
that.
his folks.
Mhm.
I know what his father's name was, and it was a Jewish name, of course. It was Chaim. And Chaim would be the same as translated into
James.
English would be Hyman
Mhm.
or Herman.
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 What his
My
last name was?
Jewish name is Chaim,
Oh, really?
named by my father
Mhm.
in memory of his father, which is traditional. My maternal aunt, Jeanette, who was in love with an actor whom she'd never met, you know, at long distance.
Can we back up? Can
Yeah.
we back up? Because I'm totally losing
All right.
all chronology.
Right.
Can you start with your father's father and whatever you remember about him?
All right.
His name was Chaim.
Chaim. His mother's name was Shana.
Okay.
That means
And they
pretty.
lived where?
Pardon me, where did they live? They lived in Selitz. I always heard it pronounced as Seltz, but it was
In Russia?
variously Russia, Poland, Russia, depending upon the fortunes of war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The boundaries kept changing.
Right.
Most, at the time when Dad was born and lived there and left there, it was Russia.
Uh-huh. Okay. And when was your father born?
My father was born in,
What are those papers?
I have it here. His birth date was 18...
That's fascinating.
Well,
I got
I do have it somewhere, and
Okay.
it might be here. He died in 1944 at the age of 67.
So we can figure it out
So
from there.
you
Good.
can date
Go
that.
back.
Good.
Yeah.
And his family name was Epstein.
Epstein.
Mm-hmm. And his father's profession was what?
His
Your grandfather?
father's profession was, he was a Hebrew teacher. He was
Scholar?
a lerer. No, he wasn't a scholar really. He was a teacher of children, preparing them for their bar mitzvah, teaching them to read Hebrew, and so on. He was a Hebrew teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And interested in music only in
Liturgical.
religious music,
Yeah.
Mhm.
liturgical music of the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
And the synagogue was probably a little shul of some kind,
Mm-hmm.
not as we know them here, but,
Mhm.
you know, the so-called storefront type of little shul. My father, as a child, sang in the choir.
Mm-hmm.
His father, as the story was related to me and as I recall it, wanted him to be the grand rabbi of all of Russia.
That I didn't know.
His aspiration was for my father to be the great learned rabbi,
I see.
which he was not, but he had this as his hopes for his son.
Mm-hmm.
He was, as I understand, very autocratic, somewhat cruel in his treatment of my father and wanting him to learn. And at the age of either 13 or 14, until my father wanted to be a musician.
Well, may I interrupt just one moment? I recall hearing this story told, that the sisters and the mother were very sympathetic to Dad. He was the only son, by the way, you have to know that.
Yeah.
He had, what, three sisters?
Three sisters.
And he was the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest?
No,
and-
no.
No?
He was not the youngest. The youngest was his sister Sarah.
Oh, she was
She
younger
was
than that.
the youngest.
Okay, but anyway, he was the only son, and, you
Mhm.
know, that's very precious,
Right.
the only son.
Right.
So they were very sympathetic to
Mhm.
Dad. And didn't they buy him a flute?
I never heard that.
They bought him an
I
instrument.
don't know where they would have gotten the flute, and I don't know where they would have gotten the money to buy it.
Because from what I understood, that he would practice, and then when his dad found out, he broke it, and that precipitated his running away from home.
That I don't know.
Yeah,
That I
that
don't
I heard,
Mhm.
that he did have an instrument. I didn't know it, but it must have been something to carry.
Well, what he said was, so far as his father was concerned, to be a musician, to his father, was like being a circus performer.
Mm.
And it was demeaning.
It was secular, you see, it
Mhm.
wasn't
And
religious.
Mhm.
so in total rebellion, father ran away from home.
How old was he when he ran away?
Young
He's
teenager.
13 or 14.
Really?
But with so much, now you say you don't know where they got the money. They did finance him because they gave him money to go away. And that was the mother and the sisters.
Sorry. He rode the train underneath to Warsaw.
I didn't know
Underneath
that.
the
He,
train?
Like
he
a
was
hobo.
a stowaway on the train
I didn't
to
know that.
Warsaw.
Oh,
He
wow.
arrived in Warsaw
Why did he go to Warsaw?
because
The
the
nearest big city.
conservatory was
And he
there.
knew he wanted to be a
He
musician?
Oh,
knew
yes.
he wanted to be a musician. That was his aspiration. It was a driving force with him.
As a kid.
Yeah.
Now,
He
this,
knew.
the rest of the story we know, of course. You know, when he sat on the steps.
No, but I want to hear it. I want to hear it
Well,
and put it
he
on the record.
arrived in Warsaw and found out where the conservatory was and went to the conservatory. It was after dark. So he stayed there on the steps of the conservatory, whether he sat or slept there through the night. And in the morning, the first professor to show up was Professor Herr Meyer. Herr Meyer was the professor of contrabass.
That's how
Right.
it happens, you know? And, excuse me for interrupting, but the interesting thing is, what was the language
He spoke the Slavic language and Polish and Russian have
well, Dad
very
spoke the
similar.
language?
Pardon?
He spoke the language? I thought it was only Yiddish.
Oh, no. Dad spoke Russian, Dad spoke Polish, Dad spoke Hebrew.
I think so.
Hmm.
And of Yiddish?
Oh, he
Because
spoke
the-
Yiddish, but
Herr
that
Meyer
was a
was-
language, that was mostly the language of the Pale of Settlement. And Dad, that was not where Dad grew up, or where they were.
I see.
That was more in the Polish Pale
I
of
see.
Settlement. Yiddish was a language.
I see.
But Dad spoke Russian,
Oh, I
and
didn't know
Dad
that.
spoke Polish.
Oh, I didn't
He
know that.
even spoke a little Czechish because they were all Slavic
that's
languages, and
where
they
the
had
Czech-
so many cognates in the
But he
language.
was not Czech by birth. He was
He was
Russian
Russian
by
by birth.
Russian. And
I
how do you spell the town?
Seletz.
S-E-L-E-T-Z. Seletz.
One of those papers you have there.
This is Father's petition for naturalization.
How fascinating.
Isn't that great?
Oh, that's
Make it
fascinating.
copy.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Seletz.
Uh-huh.
Seletz. He was born December 13th, 1978.
You mean 1878?
1878.
1878. Fascinating.
So, oh.
So, okay, so
1878.
now we've left him in the morning on the steps of the conservatory in Warsaw.
Yeah.
And the bass teacher comes by and...
Comes
And
by.
sees this young boy sitting
Uh-huh.
there.
And Father expressed that he wanted to be a musician, and so as
I
I
would
heard
take
it,
on
and
from
Herr
there.
Professor Meyer said, you would be a great bass player.
Huh.
No, well, wait a minute, no. Well, as I remember Dad telling me, so he took him into the conservatory, you know, he saw this child, you know. So he took him in and he gave him an ear test
Mhm.
and found out that he had this wonderful
Yeah.
sense. He knew what he was
Mhm.
listening to
Mhm.
and he could express it and so on. So he really became interested.
Mhm.
I said, you will be a great bass player. And he took him on as his pupil.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's how the
I
whole...
think he also took him into his home.
Ah,
Really, because he had no place to live.
No, he had
right?
nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, so that's how it all happened.
And-
But imagine the courage to
Right,
leave home.
right.
go
And
to-
did he graduate then from
He
the...
Not only
graduated
that, but
there
he became one of the
and-
professors.
Well, I want to hear this in chronology,
He
yeah.
graduated, but through a complete conservatory musical education.
Mhm.
And so his real talent was as a theorist.
Yeah. You know, he had the theory, harmony, and so on. And then while he was still a student and the professor knew he had no money, he gave him students to coach. So he earned some money that way.
Teaching also.
Right, while he was still studying, and then went on the faculty. Then he began to teach there.
And what was
As a
the
matter of
relation-
fact, he taught harmony and theory and composition and so on, and one of his pupils that had been assigned to him was Yasha Kaitis' father.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that,
Oh, that is
isn't that
fascinating.
fascinating?
One of his
pupils.
pupils.
And in fact, still in Warsaw, one day, as I heard it, Kaitis' father brought little Yasha for my father to hear him. He said he was a little kid with a runny nose, you know, a perpetual guitar, and Yasha played for him. My father said, this is the real talent.
He's got it.
But this was young Yasha.
Wow,
How about that?
That is amazing.
But his father was a pupil of mine.
Isn't that, and you know, the chronology now, that just last year I recorded, the last assistant Heifetz had, and,
I don't want to get off the subject.
yeah, I know, but I mean,
okay?
there is a
Yeah.
thread that runs through
Yeah,
the whole
right.
thing, you know, it's fascinating.
Did he get back in touch with his parents in Sevens?
Never.
Never?
His sisters, yes, but he never saw his parents alive.
Really?
Oh, wait a minute, Elmer, wait a minute, hold. He used to go back to visit, and he came.
Never.
Wait a minute, he came, hold it.
He hated his father.
Well, maybe his father was already gone. But at any rate, he came back, and he came back with a cape, and he came back as a professor, and because people who lived in this town, who lives here in New York, told me that he came back as an elegant musician with a cape and a
The
cane.
cape was called a ballerina.
Ballerina?
Yeah.
Or a
And he
ballerina, which
wore
was
that?
in Polish, the cape.
Oh.
However, I didn't know that he wore it and went back
Yeah,
home.
he did because people, the daughter of,
Yeah, well-
whatever, said that he came back, you know, so elegant.
Mhm.
He did come back.
Mhm.
Well, that, it
Uh-huh.
was
Yeah, that.
And what was his impetus to come to America? Why did
Oh.
he come here?
Oh,
Or
that-
did he travel much as a result of the conservatory?
He traveled as a performer. They had a balalaika.
I know, I have a photo of him playing.
That's how
that
they
was-
came to the States.
But that was not there. That was in the States.
I said, yeah.
Oh, no, we're still in Warsaw.
No, he didn't.
Okay.
He wasn't with a balalaika.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that-
And it was he was here, and that was a group of musicians
Okay, but
that
can-
that he knew.
Okay, then we'll
Well,
take
how
that
did
when
that-
it
that's
comes,
a little-
Well,
okay.
then how did he come here?
How did he come here? He came here because he came here under the sponsorship of Stokowski, who was the conductor of the Cincinnati Symphony. at
Yes.
the
Oh,
time.
so he came as a bass player.
He came as a bass player.
Oh, I
Now,
know
He
why-
came as a musician.
Why would he have come to Cincinnati to,
Because Stokowski.
yeah, but why? How
Because
did
the
that happen?
orchestra was there. Now, as a matter of fact, he had three sisters at that
Right.
time, who had settled in Chicago.
This is your father now, the three
My-
sisters that he had
The
left.
three sisters
at-
and
Right.
my
and
father
Sevens.
Yeah.
had settled in Chicago.
I see.
Cincinnati was not very far from Chicago,
Uh-huh.
and so that he had a place to come to. He came to Chicago,
I see.
That's before Stokowski.
but
He didn't meet Stokowski in Europe.
no, but he was. Stokowski heard of him as a fine bass player and a fine musician.
Oh.
And first place, one of the reasons of coming to the United States was that he had three sisters living in the United States, so he had a place to come to.
Mhm.
I
Did
don't
they-
know.
did they
I
come-
don't know which came first, whether he came to Chicago first and then got the job with the symphony in Cincinnati with Stokowski. I don't know.
Maybe Stokowski had been in Poland and heard him.
I
Mr.
don't.
Stokowski
I
was-
don't.
Did-
I don't know.
Did his sisters come here because of any persecution? Is that why they left
No,
Russia?
No. They didn't leave under any pogrom situation.
Uh-huh.
They came because, for one, I don't know, they came for marital opportunities, for.
So they were young girls when
They
they
were
came?
young girls.
I see.
Yeah.
And they married well.
But I'm
Well, all
puzzled.
but one.
All but Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
And so he came then to be with them and to increase his opportunities?
As a matter of fact, when he came to Chicago, he stayed with his sister Mary, who was an older sister.
Right.
She was the one who was married to the Rosenberg family,
Yeah, which is,
who were important politicians in Chicago.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget, she sent him out to do some shopping. And she wanted him to buy a rooster, or a hen, or whatever. And he didn't know the word. And finally he said, the husband of a chicken.
Isn't that cute?
And then he came back and told her, as I remember, that there was a man who owned all the property in Chicago. His name was It's a Crayon.
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Oh.
Wherever you go, you
funny.
see the name, it's a crayon.
Oh, funny.
Right, that's charming.
So
But-
now then he came to Chicago
Chicago.
first, and he auditioned for Stokowski, did he?
Well, that part we don't know whether
I don't
Stokowski
know that.
had him come because he was such a fine bass player, or that after he came, he
Yeah.
auditioned.
But then he was playing in the Cincinnati
Right.
Symphony?
Yeah.
Right.
as
And then after that, I don't know how many other things he did in between, if any. But ultimately, in our personal experience, he ended up as the house contractor for all of the Schubert theaters in
In
Chicago.
Chicago, that we remember.
Okay,
Yeah,
because
right.
I'd like to look him up in the roster of the Cincinnati Symphony. Would you have any idea when he?
Well, we could figure that
Well,
one out.
I would say if he arrived in the United States, according to this, he arrived in the United States on the 16th of September, 1906.
1906, so sometime.
So it would be
6 or
anywhere,
7.
anywhere in the span from 1906 to 1910.
Mhm.
Well, or 1907, you know, look it up in that period.
Yeah, and was he there for a number of years in the Cincinnati Symphony?
I don't think so,
Because he came to
because
Chicago.
he and Mother were married. Well, they must have been married around 1909 or 1910. 1909 probably. And Dad was living in Chicago at that time.
I see.
And he arrived when? About
1906.
Oh, 1906. So he was there about 2-3 years.
Uh-huh. And how does the Balalaika orchestra fit in?
I can think of that.
Good.
Yeah, that I don't know.
He and a group of his friends, he knew a bunch of mad musicians.
We'd
They
like
were all slightly nuts. And they decided to do the Chautauqua thing. That's
Oh,
what
yes,
this
that I
balalaika thing
Oh,
was.
yeah, that.
So they all got Russian outfits,
Baggy
blousy
pants.
the
I know.
peasant shirt,
Mm.
boots, and balalaikas, and they did the Chautauqua thing through all of the little farming communities.
Well, you know what the Chautauqua was.
No.
It was concerts or lectures or revival meetings in tents.
Intense.
In tents.
And it was,
Like
it was
community
almost,
concerts, but
I
in a tent.
see.
Yeah.
and it was also, it was almost like a circus. you know?
Yes, right.
And it brought some excitement to these
Mhm.
little farming communities, and they used to put on this whole thing that they had performed before the Tsar of Russia.
Oh, but it was
Make the whole
just
thing
for
very
show.
romantic, and then they
Uh-huh.
played the
Yeah.
balalaikas, and that's what the whole thing was.
Oh, that's
They took
wonderful.
the pictures. I remember one of his goofy friends was somebody by the name of Sam Saroff. Sam Saroff was had a fine basso voice, and as a matter of fact, somebody here that he showed as a sponsor originally, and then Rudolph Nolkovsky,
I remember that name.
musician, see, lived on Douglas Boulevard,
Yeah, west side of Chicago.
west side of
Yeah.
Chicago.
Mm.
And these were all mad musicians.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So I thought it was the Balalaika that brought him here.
No.
No. I see.
That was just a wild
Uh-huh.
thing that they
Isn't
did for
that
fun.
Uh-huh. Great.
How are we doing?
I'm okay with that one.
Well, that's okay.
This is
You're
Robert Barnes at the helm.
right. Just be in it. As a matter of fact, we'll
Yes.
take a quickie
Yes,
picture
we-
of Robert.
We'd like a cameo appearance.
Right. Right.
Now, if we could then go back and trace Mama's family.
Let me tell you
Oh, okay.
something more about your grandfather as a conductor.
Oh, yes, please.
Your interest as a conductor.
Mhm.
As the house contractor for the Schuberts, when a play would leave New York to to go on tour, they would arrive in Chicago as one of the principal cities with a nucleus of the orchestra and a conductor.
Still the same
And then
way.
they would fill in the orchestra
Yeah.
locally.
They still do it.
Yes, and my father used to
The
contract
contract.
the musicians and play.
Yes.
And the theater I remember real well was the Apollo Theater in Chicago, which later became the United Artists, not as a legitimate theater. And the conductors would come in, and some of them were very weak after all, were doing musical comedy stuff. And if he would, accuse the orchestra of not reading well or not performing, my father was a very feisty guy. Really was. And so he would speak up and he said, the problem is not the problem of the orchestra, the problem is the problem of the conductor. And he had been involved in fights in the alley
Wow.
with conductors because he was a good musician.
Oh,
And he
that's
wasn't going to tell
wonderful.
some schlepper conductor that came from
Right.
New York conducting an orchestra for a musical comedy to
Right.
tell him that his orchestra was no good.
Yeah. Did he
And-
ever stand up and conduct in the
Pardon?
place? Did he ever stand up and conduct in the place of conductors who were not?
Well, that you couldn't do.
That would have been a
That-
lawsuit
that-
or whatever.
But he did conduct, didn't he?
Well, he conducted
Oh, yeah.
choral society,
Oh,
too.
he
That,
conducted choirs.
well, that's how he met Mother.
Okay, now that's what I want to back up, to then take the thread from Mama's side and then where they meet up.
Well, let's continue with Dad, because
Yeah.
he did a lot of teaching.
He did a lot of teaching. He also had the choir for the high holidays at the big synagogue in Chicago.
Also churches.
He
remember?
also had the choir at the Cardinal Mundelein Cathedral in Chicago for the Easter services and so on.
Christmas and so on.
And,
We all-
And we would go to all denominations
We went to all
to
of
hear
them.
the choir.
We went to all of them. Now, he had really very little respect for cantors. Remember, he used to make fun of them.
Yeah, because for one,
They weren't
he was
musicians.
talking about their voices,
Yes.
and the voices.
And the improvisations, and the way
Yeah,
they did these things.
their embellishments and so on.
So he spoke fun of it.
Yeah.
So that,
He used to do imitations of some of the so-called famous cantors.
Oh, really?
One of
Oh.
them was called Ursula Rosenblatt.
Oh, sure, I have a recording of him.
Okay, my father could
you would
imitate.
hear his
I
character.
wish we had
imitate
that on
him.
tape,
Yeah.
yeah.
His characters.
And some of the others.
You don't remember, do you, what it
Well,
sounded like?
in Yiddish, he used to say, it's better if they ricen the gorgel.
What, to tear
The
the,
gorgel, if you tear the,
The
if you
throat?
what if
tear
you slit that throat?
the
Vocal
vocal
cords.
cords
Uh-huh.
of your gorgel, it was
Uh-huh.
better as a cantor. Then everybody cried at the
Uh-huh.
services.
Yeah.
Oh, in other words, if they
Yeah.
use that kind of
Uh-huh.
Italianate,
Right.
that
Yeah.
sort of
Did
thing.
he do any opera ever? Any?
Not to my knowledge.
So it was mostly the
Wait a minute,
shows that.
Wait a minute, he didn't involve himself with opera, except that he was very much interested in opera. That's where we got our operatic
Oh, no, but
exposure.
his interest was, but was he
Mozart?
involved in, as a musician
Yeah,
or in
that's what I meant.
conducting opera? Not
No,
to my
no,
knowledge.
no. But he was very much interested in opera, and our first exposure to opera was very orthodox. Mozart, Wagner, and I think, no Verdi, it was Puccini. I don't remember hearing any Verdi operas as a child, but all the Mozart operas, whenever there was pop, because we had a good opera company.
And the old Chicago
Chicago
Civic
Lyric.
Opera Company was very.
No, at that time it was, the Lyric is now, but I think
Yeah,
it
it
was
was
the
a very fine opera
Very
company,
fine.
very fine auditorium,
Yeah.
fine, permanent company.
Yeah, but it was sponsored by the man who was
Of course, Samuel Insull.
Inso, right.
Two things I wanted to ask you about his involvement. One was the conservatory, the American Conservatory in Chicago. What was his involvement there?
I think taught there, taught theory.
Because I couldn't find his name on the roster.
He taught theory.
Was it called the American Conservatory?
Yeah, that's when I went to school there,
Yeah, I know.
because he did teach at the conservatory one time. It was the American Conservatory.
The American Conservatory of Music.
That's right,
Mhm.
on State
Was its
Street.
full name.
Yeah, on
And
State
he
Street.
taught what,
On
theory?
State,
Yeah, theory,
Okay.
theory, harmony, you know,
Uh-huh.
that sort of thing.
Okay. And then the other was the Chicago Symphony. Was he involved at all in the Chicago
I
Symphony?
don't think so. I think it was Cincinnati, I think it was Cleveland.
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 He played in
Cincinnati.
Cleveland?
Yeah, played in Cleveland, Cincinnati. And I had a feeling he
that-
played in Pittsburgh. I never,
I
was-
don't know.
I don't know.
I
But it
don't
was
think so.
Cincinnati.
I think it would have been too far.
Would that have been under George Zell that he played in Cleveland?
Oh, I think it's before.
Or,
It's
Uh-huh.
before,
oh, sure.
you know. Because I think those years of playing in orchestra where Mother traveled with the two of us. Remember, she traveled with us. And the reason for that was Grandma. And wouldn't allow
Well,
the sisters.
She couldn't have traveled too much because shortly after she was married, at a very young age,
She had us.
she had us.
But she traveled with two little babies, and I remember her telling me, she lived in hotel rooms. And she would take us out in all little she had us as twin carriage, you know. And we would be neatly and cleanly dressed, and then when she brought us home from walking around with the carriage and so on, we would be grimy because it was so dirty. And that's why I thought it was Pittsburgh. But anyway, the soot from it and so on. And as she traveled for about a year or two with him. That I
You
know,
know,
because of Grandma.
I would have been too young to
Yeah.
have any
Well, I
personal
don't have,
recollection
neither
of
do
it.
I, but I
Yeah.
remember Mother
Well,
telling
now
me.
that we're on the subject of Mama, let's back up
Okay.
and pick up her story, her family, and what you remember about
You
that.
can take her version and then I'll give you mine.
Okay, all right.
Okay, all right. Well, you know, Grandpa was a widower.
Grandpa, that's
Maternal. Maternal.
Mama's father.
Right.
Was a what?
Was a widower?
Widower.
No way. He was married to her name was Amada, and she was mean as can
I
be.
thought he was a widower.
She was his second wife.
No,
was
that
his-
was Grandma was his second wife.
Grand-
No, but I'm talking, she married a widower with a
Oh,
child.
yes, she married a widower, one child.
That's right.
The mother's oldest, she was a half-sister,
well,
and
that's
her
the
name
story.
was Frida.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so
Grandma
now
was
this is-
much younger, she was young, and she married a widower,
Yeah.
you see?
And his name, Mama's father's name was what?
His name
Anyway,
was
it's Fleischman,
Laser,
Laser?
so it would have been
Lewis.
something with an L, Louis,
Lewis.
Leonard.
No, it's okay. The
Laser.
real Laser is his first name and
Fleischman.
Fleischman.
That-
Okay.
Fleischman.
That's
Okay.
Mother's family.
Fleischman, all right. And he lived where?
He lived in Chicago prior to that, in...
Quebec, and prior to that in Paris, because they came from France to Quebec.
Let's start.
Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah,
I'm
begin.
totally
He
confused.
was from a town, later became Russia, Romania, called Kishinev.
Kishinev. And could you spell
And
that?
that was in
Kesh with a K.
K, and that was in Bessarabia. And at Mother's age, now he married Grandma
Yeah.
there,
Yes, I know
Okay,
that.
his name is Laser
Laser.
Fleischman,
Fleischman.
and he was born in Kesserev,
Kishinev,
E-S,
K-E-S-H-E-N-E-V.
K-E-S-H-E-N-E-V. Okay.
And that
In
was-
Russia at that time?
That was,
Bessarabia.
that was
In between one of those borders.
Russia. Incidentally,
Any dates on that?
Grandpa?
no,
Okay.
I don't have what days, let's see.
Well, it was later than Dad's.
Yeah, Dad was something like 14 or 15 years older than Mother.
I know that. I
No.
thought it was more than that, but anyway, 50
No,
years old.
about 15 years older,
Yeah.
because I see,
Mother was 17
Okay,
or
and-
18 when they got married.
But before,
yeah, she
before
was
this.
17 or 18 when
Yeah,
they were married.
before this, so he was born in this town in Russia,
Yeah,
and he left,
he left there
To go to
and
Palestine.
went to, at that time, Palestine.
why did he go?
As an opportunist, he took grape cuttings from
That's it.
France.
Well, they went to Paris first.
No.
No, they went to Paris
was
later.
on their way
Yeah.
to the United States.
Yeah, that was later,
He
right.
took grape cuttings from France because Baron Rothschild had opened a cooperative winery in Palestine near this area where they settled. Palestine at that time was under Turkey.
Right.
It was the Turkish
You
mandate.
could homestead.
They settled in this little
Nestiona.
place, well, it wasn't Nestiona there, it had an Arabic name, Vadel Hanin.
Oh, that's it.
Vadel
Hanin.
Hanin.
Vadel is a wadi. It's like a wash.
Ah.
And it was in a valley
Uh-huh.
between the now towns of Rehovot and Rishon LeZion.
LeZion.
Which is the
Okay.
center
And,
of the one.
and
Mhm.
later, it became, it had the Hebraic name of Nestiona.
I see, that came later.
That
Because I knew
came
that
later,
was,
but it had the Arabic name when they settled there
uh-huh.
of Badil Hanim.
And the Arabs helped them build the house?
Well, sure, the Arabs worked for my grandfather
Right.
because they also were the field laborers. They helped plant the vineyards. As a matter of fact, their first house in Palestine was a tent because it was more important to plant the vineyards first. Then you built the house.
I thought you would have to have, excuse me, from what I was told, that you had to have a roof first. And if you had a roof, then you could homestead that place.
I don't know.
Yeah,
That's possible.
that was homesteading.
So Mom was born in a
tent.
tent, right? And
No. Mother was not born in Palestine. Mother was born in Kishinev, and she was 6 months old
Oh,
when they
really? I
moved.
thought she was born.
No,
Ah.
she was not. She was 6 months old when they made the move.
I see.
She was the oldest
Then I know.
of
Of the
that
second
family,
marriage, yeah.
of the second marriage. She was the oldest of 5 children. There was the half-sister, the issue of
First
the
marriage.
prior marriage of my grandfather,
Mhm.
and then 5, the issue of grandma's name was Marion.
Marion.
Yeah.
Marion.
Yeah,
Marion.
Marion.
Uh-huh.
Then she, grew up in Palestine,
Mhm.
Well, 6 months.
and
The
then
next
the
born,
question is, how did they leave?
Yes, and right, and why did it?
Okay, and why did they leave?
that's the
Did-
scandal.
Good, but he had a successful
One
Oh,
day-
yeah.
vineyard.
One
Oh,
day,
yeah.
a landsman, who knew my grandfather, showed up on the scene, and he said to Windsor, your children are growing up like savages. They have no educational opportunities, they have no marriage opportunities here. With what you have here, if you sold it, you'd be a millionaire and you'd go to the United States where the streets are paved with gold and your children would have a fine education. They'd meet other Jewish families and they'd get married and so on. So my grandfather took this to heart.
I thought it was Uncle Abe.
Uncle Abe showed up on the scene previously and impregnated
That's
his
true.
niece.
That's the scandal.
Well,
That's the
okay.
scandal in the
Uh-huh.
family.
Mhm.
And that was a real scandal, and he married her
Shotgun
under
wedding.
threat.
Sure,
Mm.
shotgun wedding.
Mhm.
And they had a family of very unfortunate children.
Mhm.
Sure,
So my grandfather took this advice to heart, and he thought, it's true. Here I've got this family. At that time, there was mother, and there was Uncle Henry, who was there was Joe, who was the youngest, who died, but there was Uncle Henry, who was born in Paris,
Right.
And-
No, Aunt Jeanette was born, Aunt Lee was born.
and Aunt Lee too.
Yeah, they're the 2 youngest, Henry and me,
Yeah.
and they're the 2
And
survivors.
so he sold, very
Uh-huh.
advantageously,
Mhm.
and was quite a wealthy man as a result of that. But he was told, if you come to the United States, you have to stop at Ellis Island, and they will put you through medical examinations. And coming from this area, if there are any diseases of the eyes,
Trachoma,
trachoma,
yeah, with
They-
from the sand.
yeah, sand and fleas and so on, they'll send you back.
Mm.
So you better stop in Paris and be sure that you get checked. Well, they went to Paris.
Mhm.
They didn't just stop, they were there for years.
And sure enough, mother had eye problems, and I don't know who else. So they remained there, and another landsman showed up on the scene. And he said, Laser, what do you have to go to the United States for?
It's a wonderful
Paris
city.
is one of the great capital cities of the world. He said, with your money and my experience, we'll go into the business of manufacturing men's caps.
They did.
So with his money and the Landsmann's experience. In the meantime, the eyes are being treated,
And they're going to school.
and 2 children are born, and the business is going quite well. And 4 calves.
May I interrupt for a moment?
Mhm.
Because Grandpa, or one of the 2 men, instituted bonus.
That's the next step. It went
Yeah.
very well.
That's right.
How did it get destroyed?
No.
Yeah,
It went
yeah.
also very well because they said, if we prosper, you prosper, and they gave them bonuses.
That's not the way it worked. My grandfather, being very social-minded, thought, if a person is sick
Well, that came back.
and does not show up at work, how can you not pay them? That's when they need their money most. So he was an innovator of sick leave. So suddenly they had a rash of sickness while the employees were working for a competitor. So they're getting paid both places.